We humans are capable of some pretty horrific things. Over the years, we've created weapons designed to kill, maim, and generally cause unpleasantness to people around the world. So we thought we'd take a look at some of the ones that are still being used today and just how easy it'll be to rid the battlefield of some of the most horrific things that humanity has put together. So without further ado, number 5 is heat rounds. Now, they're at number 5 because they aren't really particularly dangerous to civilians, but they are unpleasant nonetheless. See, you'd think you're pretty safe sat in a tank. It's a big old box of metal with several inches of steel surrounding you on all sides. And until the Second World War, you were. But then heat rounds came in and turned tanks from a nice snug steel shell into a fiery metal coffin waiting to happen. Despite the name, they've actually got nothing to do with heat. It's called a high-energy anti-tank round. They're actually all about pressure. They work by having, amazingly, a totally empty warhead, usually something like copper in a diamond shape. Behind that is a small explosive, and when the shell hits a tank, the explosive charge is set off before it hits, creating a massive pressure wave which is forced through the armour as a stream of particles travelling at 25 times the speed of sound. When it enters the tank, the huge pressure wave and scabs of molten metal left from its journey through leave little chance of escape for the poor souls inside. At number 4, depleted uranium. And now we start getting into the territory where you can really hurt bystanders. Uranium is a byproduct of nuclear enrichment, but whilst it's not all that radioactive in itself, it is very, very dense, and it's just lying around after the enrichment process, which makes it ideal for armour-piercing bullets and tank shells. So why is it so horrible? Well, when the shell hits the tank, it fractures into several razor-sharp chunks and a fine powder so hot it burns on contact with air. So when it gets through the tank hull, it sprays razor-sharp shards of metal around and a huge fireball is formed, making life very unpleasant once again for the people inside. And once it's done that, all the powder flies into the atmosphere and settles on the ground, where it eventually gets ingested by the local population or other soldiers. The health risks are disputed by some studies, especially claims that it causes cancer, but when ingested it can have horrible effects. Hospitals in parts of the Balkans and Iraq have reported massive increases in child leukemia and birth defects. In fact, in Fallujah, the infant mortality rate due to those two factors alone is 13.6%. Although depleted uranium shells are still in wide-scale use, the UN has recommended that they could potentially fall under the title of chemical weapons, which would make their use illegal.
Down the hole!
On the surface, white phosphorus is just fine and dandy. It's a chemical compound fired out of artillery shells and grenades, which is used to create smoke to hide tanks and troops and used as a marker to illuminate targets. Nothing quite so dangerous there, it may even directly save some lives. Oh, except for when it actually hits something, because then it becomes a bubbling, roiling substance that sticks to everything and can melt flesh right down to the bone. And once it's done that, the chemical gets into the bloodstream and can cause multiple, massive organ failures. If it hits a tank or is thrown into a bunker, the rapidly burning chemical uses all the oxygen in the vicinity and spreads noxious fumes around, suffocating anyone inside. It's also really difficult to put out. Its use as a weapon is partially banned. You're not allowed to fire it in the hopes of using its chemical properties to kill people, although in a rather sick twist, you can use its heat-based melty properties to kill. Far more humane, obviously. America's admitted to using the stuff in Afghanistan and Iraq, Israel's used it against Lebanon in 2006 and Gaza in 2008, and its legal status, well, as long as it's only used against soldiers in open ground, it's more or less, unfortunately, fine. At number 2, cluster bombs. Because what's worse than a bomb? Several thousand tiny ones. That's what. Especially when half of them don't go off, either by accident or because they're waiting for some unfortunate soldier, or just as often a civilian, to step on them or pick them up. Cluster bombs are tiny explosive devices carried in one giant bomb holder, either a large single bomb or an artillery shell. At a set distance above the ground, the shell disintegrates, spreading anywhere from a few dozen to thousands of bomblets over a wide area of ground. They aren't designed to destroy buildings, but to hit infantry roads or airfield runways, or sometimes to lay minefields. Basically, they're designed to take out soft targets in a way that will keep them from being repaired. The problem with that is that the bombs can simply stay around. Either some don't explode for whatever reason, or they aren't meant to explode. They're left ahead of approaching troops to detonate later, and they can lie for decades, just waiting for someone to step on one. They are pretty indiscriminate, and collateral damage is almost a certainty. And the weapons are everywhere: in Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos, Chechnya, Croatia, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan and Iraq. After the admitted use of 1,500 cluster weapons on Baghdad, including in residential areas in 2003, General Richard Myers, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, declared that only one civilian casualty had been recorded. This is what a cluster bomb looks like. Unsurprisingly, there are records suggesting far more were killed and injured, and tens of thousands of bomblets remain unexploded. A 2008 convention banning cluster munitions was signed by 83 countries. The US and Russia were not among them. And finally, our number one in the list of destruction: MIRVs. Nuclear missiles are the most terrifying things we've ever built, more scary even than Beliebers. So what would happen if you crossed a nuclear missile with a cluster bomb? Well, you'd end up with a MIRV, or a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle. The premise is simple and totally bastardic. It takes off, flies to the edge of space, and then splits open, dropping several remotely guided bombs back to the ground. These smaller bombs are, combined with radar-confusing flares, harder to shoot down, and because you're not putting all your nuclear eggs in one basket, far more destructive when they hit. Think they'd have been scrapped by now? Nah. The US Minuteman missile carries 3 nuclear bombs, and the Trident system used by the US and UK carries 12 per missile. That's one missile with the potential to single-handedly wipe out London, Berlin, Madrid, Rome, Paris, Bucharest, Vienna, Budapest, Hamburg, Warsaw, Barcelona and Munich.